Good evening, brothers and sisters. It is wonderful to be with you. Um, and let us begin, as we do with all things, with a prayer. And take a moment to be still and go from movement of your regular breath to mindful breathing, to the flow of your in-breath and your out-breath. Be present to this moment and know that we are in the presence of God, whom we've come to know as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. God of love, show us our place in this world as channels of your love. For all the creatures of this earth, for not one of them is forgotten in your sight. Enlighten those who possess power and money, that they may avoid the sin of indifference, that they may love the common good, advance the weak, and care for the world in which we live. The poor and the earth are crying out. O Lord, seize us with your power and light. Help us to protect all life, to prepare for a better future, for the coming of your kingdom of justice, peace, love, and beauty. Praise be to you. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Well, tonight we're going to be reflecting on Chapter 3, Human Roots of the Ecological Crisis. And just to give you an overview, again, that this whole encyclical is inspired by Saint Francis, and Pope Francis focuses on the concerns of our day and gives central attention to the dominant technocratic paradigm, which has led to our current situation and the effects it has on people. And so what he's going to be opting for is a technocratic solution to the environmental degradation. Cannot be the way. It has to be more holistic way, bringing in, spirituality, theology, morality, politics, economics, and so forth. So if we're going to make this shift from only a technocratic solution to a more spiritual based one that includes technology, we need to make this shift. If we're able to make those changes, we need to make. So he calls for a dialogue to create an ethical framework of principles and behaviors. It's an ethical framework that is going to move us to a better world as we work through this environmental crisis. And he suggests several areas for discussion and decision making. Okay, so chapter 3, if you have your book, it begins on page 49. And so he says that we have come to this point because we're at a crossroads by our technological developments. Starting with the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago, it is technology that has brought us to this point. And as Albert Einstein said one time, the consciousness that created the problem can't solve it. So we're not going to solve this problem just with a technological solution. So he says that we've enjoyed 200 years of the beneficiaries of the Industrial Revolution, and now we're entering in a new era of the digital revolution with robotics and biotechnologies and nanotechnologies. And he says we can rejoice. I'm on section 102. We can rejoice in these advances, and they do open up immense possibilities. And so science and technology are wonderful products of God-given human creativity. And so, but there's much more that's needed than technology. So in order to be fully human in 103, We need to have the capacity to contemplate the beauty of creation. We need to make this leap from technology to what makes us uniquely human. So he's really asking us to really expand our consciousness of what it means to be a human being. So it has been technology that has given us an impressive dominance over the whole of humanity and of the entire world. We are rulers of the earth. That has worked positively with the enhancement of economic prosperity, but it's the same technology, or what Saint Bonaventure talks about, the eye of the mind. He, in his epistemology, Saint Bonaventure talks about, the eye, the body, which is the five senses, or seven senses, five senses, and then when we reflect upon our sensate experience, that's the eye, the mind, where we analyze our experience. And the next level is the eye of the soul, in which we acquire wisdom. And it seems that for Western civilization, Western man, we've just stayed at the level of the eye of the soul, or the eye of the mind, of technology and understanding. And we really are immature when it comes to wisdom. So the immature mind, the immature soul, has allowed technology to create such an array of technology that gave rise to Nazism, communism, totalitarianism, and has led to the development of the arsenal of nuclear weapons and modern warfare. It's that same mindset that creates the Industrial Revolution, and the technology, unbridled by moral presuppositions, has led to a situation where we have this nuclear arsenal, where we have the capacity of destroying the planet. So Pope Francis says it's extremely risky for a small part of humanity to have control of all this technology for its own nationalistic purposes. And so he says on 105, there's a tendency to believe that as we increase our prowess, our power, that progress in itself is an end. That if we have progress, this will advance our security and our welfare. And so progress is often seen as an end in itself. I remember when Ronald Reagan used to be pitching advertisements for General Electric during the 60s, I think, or 70s, and the phrase that GE used in their advertisement was, "Progress is our most important product." Well, Francis is questioning that notion. Now, the reason he says on 105 that we've gotten to our current situation is that technological development has not been accompanied by development of human responsibility. If they went hand in hand, we would not be experiencing environmental degradation. What we've seen is an explosion of industrialization, technology, but it's been disconnected from responsibilities, values that promote the common good, and conscience. So we've had this sort of dichotomy: incredible technological development, separated from human responsibility, values, and conscience. And so Francis is moving us back to where those two are joined. and the bottom of 105, he notes, and this is really speaking from his Catholic experience, human beings are not completely autonomous. You have this kind of Ayn Rand, Atlas Unshrugged notion of that we are autonomous individuals that are self-contained. And as Catholics, we have a relational sense of human identity, of personal identity. We are who we are in relationship to God and each other. We are connected with each other as brothers and sisters. That's the basis of our solidarity as we participate in the body of Christ. And because Christ has redeemed the whole world and Christ became human, we have harmony with creation. So the West, especially in America, with rugged individualism and personal autonomy, where my personal freedom has become the ultimate, that is really based upon a lie. We're not autonomous. We are relational beings that are meant to be in solidarity with each other, and we have duties and responsibilities towards each other and God and creation. And so the idea that we can get ourselves out of this situation with superficial mechanisms or technological advances by perpetrating the same values, that's not going to work. We have to have a sound ethics, a culture that is inclusive, and a spirituality that's genuinely capable of setting limits of what we do within the environment and teaching us a clear-minded self-restraint. That's where Francis is guiding us. And I've said this before, when Pope Francis came out with his encyclical, Sean Hannity on Fox News, quote unquote, said, well, if we take what Francis is saying, and Hannity, by the way, is Catholic, so if we take what Pope Francis is saying, we're gonna have to change our lives. Like, that's not negotiable for Hannity. And because if we do practice self-restraint, we can't do whatever we want to do regarding the environment. So we are going to have to change the way we live. So now looking at section 2, the globalization of the technocratic paradigm. He says that the West, on 106, technology and development has unfolded what we call an undifferentiated one-dimensional paradigm. We see human development only within the context of technology and progress. And so nature is seen as existing for our welfare and benefit, and that we can do with nature whatever we need to do for our progress and economic development. So in other words, nature exists for us with this old paradigm. And so with this attitude that nature exists for our well-being, then we can extract whatever is possible, whatever we want, and forgetting the reality of what lies before us. That if we just have an extractive mentality, what does that do once we extract and leave? What does it do with the communities that are dependent upon the environment for the well-being? And so when there's pushback of indigenous people, say in the Amazon basin, who are resisting the deforestation of the Amazon for ranches, then we have confrontation between economic powers trying to suppress the indigenous people who want to live on their land as they've done for centuries. The extractive model goes hand in hand with the conceit that there's an infinite supply of the earth's goods. And so we can squeeze the earth beyond what it's capable of providing with the assumption it's always going to be there. It's always going to be available, and it can be renewed quickly. And that the negative effects based upon our extractive mentality, our unbridled consumerism, that these can be easily absorbed. And we can keep on doing, the same old, same old. So Francis in 107 says that science and technology has created what he calls an epistemological paradigm, which shapes individuals and societies. We have a notion of knowledge that's very limited. And we don't, and this notion does not see the totality or the human person and his or her totality, the relationship to God, solidarity with others, and with nature. And so that's why this environmental degradation cannot be solved with just a technocratic solution. We have to look at our epistemological assumptions that give rise to this problem. Because if we don't do that, if we don't examine our assumptions, then all we're doing is rearranging the furniture on the Titanic. So he's really calling for a very basic re-examination of our intellectual assumptions and values. So he says in the bottom 107, decisions have to be made as to what kind of society we want to forge, what we want to form. I've heard this said several times, that when the Native American tribes would get together and try to work out some regional conflicts, and when they would propose solutions, they would ask themselves, if we do this, what effect is it going to have on 5 generations from now? This is the Native American sensibility. We don't think that way. We look at how is this going to affect, the quarter profit returns. Okay, so we see power on section 108. We see power in a dominative, controlling, manipulative way. Power means lordship over all. And so as a result, mankind seizes hold of the naked elements of both nature and human nature. So if power is seen as lordship over all, then we will dominate not only creation, we will dominate other human beings. Now, it's interesting, when we are baptized and anointed, we are anointed as priest, prophet, and king. And we're anointed as king. That means we are called to share in Jesus's kingly power. And he uses power not to dominate or control. He uses power to serve as self-emptying. He uses power to serve others. As he said, I came not to be served, but to serve. And so we have to make this shift of using power, not in a dominating way, but in a way that serves our fellow human beings as well as creation. Now, the bottom line for a capitalist economy is technological advances are used. How does it promote profit? And that's seen as the ultimate good, without any regards as to the negative impact it has on human beings. So the profit motive has to be challenged. It doesn't mean it doesn't have a place, but it's not the ultimate criterion, because when we make our economic decisions, we have to look at how does it benefit human beings and nature. And if it has an injurious effect, then we have to examine what we're doing, even if in the short term it would generate profit. But if we're blinded to the profit motivation, then we will continue down this path of economic degradation. So one of the consequences of environmental degradation is it has promoted or tolerated, or to some extent caused, global hunger and poverty. And these two things, global hunger and poverty, cannot be solved by market growth. That can only be done by multinational coming together, arriving at solutions to better lives of other human beings, even if it doesn't in the short term benefit us nationally. So if you come from a posture of extreme nationalism, that my country comes first, and if you gauge foreign policy solely on the basis of how it benefits America, then you're going to be less inclined to try to ameliorate global hunger and poverty. So market growth alone cannot solve these problems. Market growth cannot ensure integral human development and social inclusion. At the same time, if we have a super development of wasteful and consumerist kind, forms all sorts of negative consequences. This consumerism on steroids, we cannot continue down this path, because not only right now we're seeing the effects of that, but consumerism is not it can't ameliorate environmental degradation. It can only make it worse. So we really do have to examine the way we live and the way our GDP is geared towards. It's not either or, but the consumer model really has to be seriously examined. So on bottom of 109, Francis feels that we fail to see the deepest roots of our present failures, which have to do with the direction, goals, and meaning and social implications of technological and economic growth. So the failures are right there in front of us. I mean, we just, they're really in our face. But we're not really examining the causes that created these effects. And until we do, we really have to seriously examine the implications of unbridled technology and economic growth. Because unless we examine them, we will continue to perpetuate them, and we're seeing the effects of that. So what Francis is asking us in 110 is that technology has to be integrated into a larger vision. If it just exists discreetly and becomes the interpretive lens by which we process our experience, then we're not going to be able to address our current situation. So we have to have a larger vision. And that's the contribution Catholicism can bring, because we have a universal vision that's relational and is inclusive. And if we lose the appreciation for the whole, if we minimize the basis of relationship between human beings and our solidarity, if we lose sight of a broader horizon, then we're taking the risk of we becoming irrelevant. So if we embrace this larger vision, then we'll be able to put the environmental degradation and the situation of the poor within a context. And from that, we can say we have duties, responsibilities towards the environment, towards our brothers and sisters. And these problems cannot be dealt with and from a technological perspective, from a single set. Technology can be used, but it has to be used in conjunction with spirituality and morality and values. So if we just acquiesce to a technological paradigm, and the technological paradigm becomes the key and the meaning of human existence, then we're really lost. I mean, we're not going to be able to get ourselves out of this through that perspective. And this is what Francis is bringing to this discussion of the environment. He is bringing the vision that Jesus is the Lord of all of creation, and we are who we are in relationship to him, which is the basis of our solidarity with each other and harmony with creation. We have the vision. Now we just have to present it in a compelling way as we address our situation. And that was really when the Paris Agreement was being forged about 5 years ago. They encouraged Pope Francis, because they knew he was coming out with his encyclical, and they urged him, publish your encyclical before we come together, because this encyclical is the it gives the philosophy, the theology of spirituality to work through our environmental crisis. I mean, he's given them the spirituality, the morality of processing this, and they knew that, and they when that got published, they use it as a basis for the Paris Agreement. Okay, any questions so far? I'm kind of rattling on here. Okay, so on 111, so we move from a kind of a uni perspective, a technological perspective, to a more holistic way, and so there needs to be, he says, a distinctive way of looking at things a way of thinking differently that's going to generate new policies, an educational program, a lifestyle, a new lifestyle, and a spirituality. Now, if we move in this direction, we have to be prepared for blowback. There will generate resistance to the assault of the technocratic paradigm because there are vested interests that want the technocratic paradigm to persist because there's a financial imperative tied to it. So if we're going to move in a direction that's going to challenge that paradigm, there has got to be resistance, which we have to effectively take into account. So if we don't move in the direction of this holistic approach, if we don't see reality as being interconnected, then we will mask the true and deepest problem of the global system. You know, Francis is calling us, we have to examine how we relate towards each other at an interpersonal level, how two nations relate towards each other, how we relate to to nature. And unless we reevaluate these, we won't be able to come out of this in a way that's healthy or beneficial. It's just not going to happen. And in 112, he cites certain things that are, seem like coming out of like the New Earth catalog. But you see, people at a grassroots level in which you have cooperatives of small producers who are using environmental friendly ways of growing crops. So you have, the farm to fork cooperatives, and you have kind of a sort of a non-consumer model of life. Like Gandhi said, are you willing to live simply so others could simply live? What would it be like to live a less consumer-driven model? How would that affect my recreation? How would it affect how I relate to the community? So you see pockets of this, but I think what he's advocating is this should be the norm rather than the exception. In 113, he really sends up a caution. He says there's a significant number of people who no longer believe in a happy future. They've given into pessimism and cynicism. They no longer have blind trust in technology, but they don't see an alternative. And so there is a growing awareness that science and technology cannot be equated with human progress and development. But there's an anxiety, well, what is there besides technology and progress? And this is what spirituality, especially Catholicism, can bring. And so this is really, I think this malaise that many people are experiencing, it really is a spiritual crisis, because it's asking, who am I? And who am I in relationship to God and others and creation? And I think if you are enthusiastically living in God and have a sense of solidarity and have a sense of harmony with creation, you are going to be hopeful that we can emerge from this in a positive way. because we have that depth. We just have to find ways to apply this. You know, we have the foundation, we have the spirituality, we have the reasons for acting this way. Now our challenge is working within our society for the appropriate application. And so what he's really advocating is a cultural revolution to 114, to look at reality in a different way. You know, not to look at reality from a consumer-driven way, but to look at reality in a relational way. Relationship to God and my brothers and sisters and creation. To look at progress in terms of what's sustainable. What's sustainable for human society, not just America, but to the developing world. And what's sustainable for creation. And then to rediscover those values that have been swept away by unconstrained consumerism. The values are there. We just have to embrace them and put them to the forefront. So the next section is section 3, is the crisis of and effects of modern anthropocentrism. And that, I think, is an ideology that's based upon man as the end all. You know, rather than mankind being in relationship to God in solidarity, as mankind is seen as an autonomous entity. So if the cosmos is seen where things can be just thrown together with complete indifference, while ignoring the intrinsic dignity of the world, that's how the environment gets compromised. If we just see the interaction of human beings and the environment as things that are just thrown together, and we can kind of extract from it what we want for ourselves, having complete indifference to the larger picture, that creates the problem that we have today. And so as we move forward, we must respect the natural and moral structures with which we have been endowed. So when we discuss economic imperatives and how they're going to impact societies, we have to engage in to respect nature, and we have to bring in moral considerations. I mean, just take, you know, when how the manufacturing has created in our country, as manufacturing has shifted to China, as really, you know, so many jobs were lost, and some companies that were very prosperous, they moved to developing countries such as, you know, Mexico and Southeast Asia, so that they could increase their profit margin. I mean, they're still being profitable, but they can make more money by transporting the factory to the developing world. So, a consequence that small rural communities were devastated. They were left to fend for themselves. So, on an economic basis, yes, that they move to the developing world, they can make more money. But the ethical consideration would be, well, what do you do with the people you leave behind? Don't they count? And if it's just a profit motive, it's, well, too bad. But if you bring in moral considerations, what responsibilities do I have to these communities? Then you might, take a more, balanced posture. So I think one of the best kept secrets of the Catholic Church is the compendium of social justice. And it is the basis of our Christian anthropology. It's the basis of our social justice tradition. And most Catholics don't even know it exists. But if we had internalized our social justice tradition, we would be a more effective force within our society. But we can reclaim that. And that's what Francis is doing. But because we have lost sight of a Christian anthropology, we have not been an effective voice of understanding, of promoting the conversation of human beings and the world. And so what we have instead, since the Catholic vision of human anthropology hasn't been presented in a credible way, and even though it's there, we don't know it ourselves, we haven't presented it in a compelling way. And so in the absence of that, which is our fault, what's given rise is what he calls this Promethean vision of mastery of the world. Prometheus was given fire to have control over the world. And with the absence of any sense of responsible stewardship. So when we, in 117, when we fail to acknowledge that the part of our world of the poor person, that the poor person has rights and duties, and he sees this callous regard towards human beings is our attitude towards the unborn. I remember in the workup to the first Iraq war, and when we applied these embargoes on Iraq, including medical embargoes, and it was estimated that prior to the invasion, that 600,000 Iraqi children died. And this was brought to the attention of Madeleine Albright. And she says, well, that's what's the word? Material casualty, or I forget what the expression was, but that was just an inadvertent casualty that had to happen. And then Cardinal George said that the reason that we could tolerate the death of 600,000 Iraqi children is we have a callous disregard towards the unborn in the womb. And if we do not have respect the dignity of the unborn, that helps to explain our callousness towards the poor. And so we have this sense instead that we have absolute dominion over creation. As long as it benefits ourselves, which is kind of a nationalistic perspective, as long as it benefits America, regardless of the effects it has on the poor in the developing world, we can proceed to do it. And Francis says, the callous disregard towards the unborn is conjoined with the callous disregard of the poor in the developing world, because they are suffering the consequence of the environmental degradation more so than we are right now. So he's saying on section 118, there can be no renewal of a relationship with nature without a renewal of humanity itself. They go hand in glove. If we are going to renew nature, we have to renew humanity. And that means we have to ask ourselves, what truly is human progress? What promotes human well-being? Is it consumerism? A self-referential ideology, individualism? What promotes the human good? Now, he says that human beings will not feel responsibility towards the world unless their unique capacities of knowledge, of free will, of responsibility are recognized and valued. These come from God. We are made in the image of God. God has a mind. He has a consciousness. He is omniscient. And he has given us the gift of understanding, of knowledge, that we can acquire truth. God has a will. He wills the good of all of creation. And he gives us the will to choose the good. And he respects our freedom and to use our freedom responsibly. So unless these are valued in human beings, we're not going to feel responsible towards the world. So if we do value these things, knowledge, will, responsibilities, freedom, then we will use them appropriately. And the appropriate use of knowledge, will, freedom, responsibility, the appropriate use is according to our Father's will. When they are conjoined together, we are living in the fullness of our humanity. And our political, economic, and social endeavors are conjoined to that, including our environmental concerns. So he's saying on 119, we cannot presume to heal our relationship with nature and the environment without healing all fundamental human relationships. And this is, the work that, Lisa is doing with the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, that we have duties, responsibilities towards our brothers and sisters in the developing world. Our responsibilities do not stop with Americans. And as Catholics, we have this profound sense of solidarity because we are brothers and sisters towards each other. And the poor have claims on us. We have responsibilities towards them of how we use our wealth, our time, and our talent. And unless we fundamentally examine our human relationships, then we are going to continue to be indifferent towards the developing world and the poor. So, and now, and more to it, he says our relationship with the environment, this is 119, our relationship with the environment cannot be isolated from our relationship with others and God. That's why I thought it was really remarkable that the Paris Agreement implored Pope Francis to come out with his encyclical ahead of time, because they knew he was coming from a God-centered perspective. They weren't saying, delete the God stuff and we'll take the rest. No, they knew where he was coming from. And so if we're going to have a holistic perspective, it's got to be grounded in a relationship with our brothers and sisters and God. And if any one of those is missing, we're not going to be able to journey through this. So, now the next section is practical relativism on section 122. He says that practical relativism is even more dangerous than doctrinal relativism. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out what he meant here. Doctrinal relativism is there are no universal absolute values that are objective. All values are culturally, historically conditioned or situational. So they are, values are kind of conditioned by human aspiration. There is no outside narrative that we justify our values. So that's doctrinal relativism. Practical relativism is that all endeavors only have importance insofar as they serve our immediate interest, one's more immediate interest. So it's like we look at a situation and the question is, how does this benefit me right now? And it's sort of a practical consideration. If it enhances me economically, if it enhances me in terms of my acquisition of pleasure, then I can do it. So coupled with doctrinal relativism and practical relativism, that leads to environmental degradation and social decay. Because if we have a perspective that's the prism is our relationship with God, each other, and nature, and we look at a policy or a practice and say, no, even though it benefits you in the short term, you can't live this way because it has these negative consequences. Well, it doesn't bother me. Yes, but it can have a negative effect on indigenous people in the Amazon basin, or those in the developing world, or those that are suffering from water scarcity. It has an impact on them. One says, well, that doesn't affect me. Well, it should if you understood who you are. So we have to examine what he calls this practical relativism. And we do live in a culture. There's an absence of objective proofs and sound principles that are universal and are objective. And what we're seeing, with this, with the internet, is that we have a very undeveloped sense of acquiring truth and how we go about acquiring truth. Not only how we approach it epistemologically and how we justify our truth claims, but people are even doubting whether you can acquire truth, whether it's even possible. Or you have your truth and I have my truth. We have alternative facts type of thing. Okay, so this practical relativism, when coupled with what he calls in 123, this throwaway culture, practical relativism and a throwaway culture generates so much waste because we have this disordered desire to consume more than what is really necessary. Remember a couple of years ago, about 10 years ago, Kathy and I were walking in the downtown mall. I guess it's where the new Coliseum is. And there's like all these stores. And I said to Kathy, well, how many different items do you think are here? And there's thousands. So I bet I bet there's 40,000. I don't know. I just pulled it out of my hat. And I said to her, how many of those items do you think we really need? And she said, probably not very much. And so we have this kind of throwaway culture, especially with young people. Some young people, they are loath to wear the same clothes more than once. They buy clothes that are fairly cheap. They wear it and then they give it away. And that, so it's creating a problem in terms of recycling. But so we have this kind of mentality, I wear it once or twice, and I throw it away, and I can replace it with something, as good, cheaply. But now I still have that old sweater or blouse, it's got to go somewhere. I mean, it's just kind of an aside. It's, it speaks to my my taste in clothes. But the other day, I was getting ready for school, and I put on a shirt, and I was trying to be color coordinated. I had put on a shirt. It was a reddish shirt, and I had a maroon sweater. And I looked, and I had that shirt. That shirt is 35 years old. I got it when I first started St. Francis. And okay, granted, it's polyester, it has a life of, a zillion years, but, it still works. It's kind of old fuddy-duddy, but still works. So what, if you side the, please excuse the tangent, but when we really have, to examine this throwaway culture and practical relativism. And so we really have to ask, how does this lifestyle affect the environment? How is it going to affect culture? Is it going to promote the betterment of culture and truth, or is it going to lead to its degradation? If we have universally valid principles that are objective, that apply to everyone, then what we do is we exercise prudential judgment and to take these universal principles and apply them to concrete situations. And we know that they're valid and they'll promote human growth. But we need to argue for them credibly, because there's going to be resistance, because they're going to be seen as arbitrary impositions. We have to tell other people why it's good and true to embrace this lifestyle. We just can't say, just do it. We have to give them reasons to embrace this alternative lifestyle from the throwaway consumer-driven culture.
Yeah, how is it going to benefit them to give up our lifestyle the way it is? That's what we have to show them, how it's going to benefit them. That's a good one.
It is, and that's why you start with basic principles of who we are. What does it mean to be human? You are who you are in relationship to God, solidarity with other human beings, and nature and creation. That's a starting point. And how you present that.
I don't know if God's going to be part of that. I don't know if God's going to be God would be a great thing to add, but people don't believe in God that much. They don't care about that right now. They care about their consumerism. They care about getting ahead. So we gotta go to their level and show them that it's good for them.
Well, you start with their existential situation, and what's prevalent is anxiety, fear, all the indices of people being psychologically unhealthy. They're all there. So you ask the question, if these assumptions are good, why do we have such a psychological, emotional, spiritual disquietude and unhealthy situations? Do you experience this, or do you see it in your society? Well, yeah, I mean, you got to be blind not to see it. Then you say, well, where does that come from? And yeah, I mean, the basic principles are simple, but they're true. And
but they are blind.
Yeah, well, that's before you. Okay, this is Bishop Barron has a notion. You lead with what is the truth, the beauty, and the good. I agree with that. But also Father Richard Rohr says that before you can proclaim the good news, you have to deconstruct the bad news. And I think there's something to that. So you have a kind of a cultural critique of where we are. And if we continue practicing the same old values, it's not going to get any better. It's like definition of insanity. And so, we are here on the basis of our values have come to these consequences like karma. And so if our presuppositions and values have led us to this, they cannot get us out of it. At that point, they may be open to other possibilities. And the other possibilities are not a technocratic situation, but it has to be holistic, namely mankind grounded in the relationship with God, solidarity, and creation. You can't omit those. If you omit any one of those three, then we're just going to fall back to the old way. So I kind of, if you go, moving on here. On 125, he talks about the correct understanding of work and human activity. And he says that we must put our work within the context of how it promotes human development. It's, if we are who we are in relationship with God and each other, how does my work promote my development as a human being? And he cites the Benedictines, Saint Benedict of Nursia. They had the notion of ora et labora, work and labor. And the Benedictines, what they were, 7th century, and they saw manual labor as being spiritually meaningful. And that proved to be revolutionary because the Benedictine community spread throughout Europe. And so what was the gift of the Benedictines was personal growth and sanctification came about through one's ordinary experience, one's labor. It wasn't either or, like I go to chapel and pray, then I go out and do my work out in the fields. No, he saw that labor and prayer coming together. And Francis is encouraging us to develop that sensibility that I can give God praise and glory through my economic endeavor, through my work. And so if man is the source and focus and aim of all economic and social life, if it just stays there, then we see where that leads us. But if man and his labor and his relationships are seen in relationship to God, then we'll have that sense of solidarity. So in other words, our economic activity, if it's going to be spiritually healthy, it's not just a way of making a living. Our economic activity is a way of enhancing ourselves, bettering our families and our communities. And it has a good, and it can be a way of sanctifying my life. So work seen relationally, God, brothers and sisters, and creation, that allows for rich personal growth. So that's another paradigm shift. You're seeing work not as how do I, make money, but I'm seeing work as personal growth, which is relationship to God and others. And so this allows for creativity, planning for the future, developing our talents, living our own values, relating to others, and giving glory to God. That's healthy economic enterprise. And so in taking account the reality of today's global society, I'm on section 127, the reality of today's global society, it is essential that we continue to prioritize the goal of access to steady employment for everyone. So if employment is a way of personal growth, then having steady employment for all should be a high priority. No matter how much that might put a limit on businesses and their dubious economic reasoning. So in other words, if you're showing profit, the idea that you cut labor to make more profit, that needs to be re-examined. We were, on 127, 128, we were created with a vocation to work. Work is necessary. It's necessary for, it gives meaning to our life here on earth. It's a path to growth, human development, and personal fulfillment. Work, our jobs are important. And we attain dignity by expressing ourselves through labor. So with this movement towards automation, it can't be done in isolation. If people are going to be dislocated through automation, then they need to be shifted to another level to be trained for other enterprises. If you, in order to cut cost of production by eliminating labor through automation, without by laying off workers and replacing them with machines, to do that in isolation without creating an environment where they can make a shift to other kinds of labor, that's unconscionable. So he's not, once the genie's out of the bottle, automation is not going to go away, but it can't be done in isolation. You have to take into account the well-being of your workers who are being displaced. So human cost, he says, always include economic cost. Economic dysfunctions always involve human cost. So this is like karma. Every effect has its predictive causes. And if we stop investing in people in order to gain better short-term financial gain, in the long run, that's bad for business and it's bad for society. We have to look at the longer game. Okay, so on 129, he talks about agribusiness, that in the short term, it might be more efficient for economy of scale. But what agribusiness does, it eliminates small producers and differentiated productions, and it diminishes the communities that are associated with rural community farming. So when you're seeing the Amazon basin, you have a deforestation to create ranch lands for cattle to produce hamburgers. And so this way of life that goes back centuries is being eliminated for agribusiness. So it's so he really is encouraging supporting small producers of agriculture. New biological technologies, 130. He makes a reference that experimentation on animals is only morally acceptable if it remains within reasonable limits and contributes to caring for human lives. There has to be a pretty direct connection of animal experimentation in the promotion of human lives.
So not for makeup.
Yes, right. So quoting John Paul II on 131 on page 64, he says, we cannot interfere in one area of the ecosystem without paying due attention to the consequences of such interference in other areas. So for example, the petroleum industry last 20, 30 years is aside from fossil fuel, is using petroleum to produce plastic. So, and we produce tons of plastics every day. Now it's going to the oceans, which would be absorbed by fish and into their bodies. So, so the manufacturing of plastics has had a direct impact on the oceans. And he cautions about the indiscriminate use of genetic modification of products, grains. He really, I guess, believes that nature will take care of itself, and when you modify products, to dealing with, say, pesticides and so forth, there might be a short-term gain, but in the long run, it might have injurious effects. So he says that we need to constantly rethink the goals, effects, and overall context and ethical limits of human activity. That's the Native Americans. How is this going to affect 5 generations? Let's look at our goals. How is this going to promote human well-being? What effects is it going to have on the environment? What are the ethical limits? If we do this, what are the consequences? So it's really asking us to be real responsible moral agents. And he says that the intervention of human activity on nature, it can only be done so in the development of creation as intended by God. So if we're going to intervene in nature, we have to do so in accordance with how does it promote God's purposes with having dominion over creation. Is this promoting God's purposes? Because a society cannot sustain itself and survive in the long run if it's running contrary to God's purposes. It's just not possible. Okay, so kind of wrapping up on 134. I guess he's referring to the gig economy, that when you look at the emergence of temporary workers, which do not have benefits, or rural workers, that with agribusiness, when you eliminate rural farming and they have no place to go, then they'll flood urban areas, which creates all sorts of urban problems. So agribusiness leads to the eradication or elimination of rural populations. And they have to sustain themselves, so they'll go to urban cities. And so, with the expansion of agribusiness, it has the effect of destroying complex ecosystems and diminishing the diversity of production. So the agribusiness, they tend to produce just one product, cattle or hogs or chickens. And that affects regional economies now and in the future. I mean, once you eliminate rural communities, it's really hard to bring them back. So to wrap up on 136, and he does touch on earlier on abortion, and he touches on the experimentation on human embryos. And he sees this as an indication of our disregard to the dignity of human beings. So just because we can technologically do something doesn't mean that we ought to. And if we transgress all boundaries with experimentation that's carried out in living human embryos. And he goes on to say, we forget that the inalienable worth of human beings transcends his or her degree of development. Human dignity happens at conception. They are human at that point, male or female. In the same way, when technology disregards the great ethical principles, it ends up considering any practice whatever as licit. If we can do it, then it's licit, regardless of ethical considerations. And so we've seen a technology severed from ethics will not easily be able to limit its own power. So if you sever technology from morality, there are no guardrails to limit its own power. Okay, so when Teresa sends this out, she'll be sending out some questions for reflection. But is there anything that kind of sticks out at you that you'd like to comment on?
Deacon Jim, I think these issues we've covered today has grown so much. And like you said, there hasn't been, each country, has its own checks and balances, but some reason, I guess, in all this development and growth that we've seen, I think it appears like we've forgotten to put those checks and balances in place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the problem is so enormous that I think it's going to have to be addressed from so many different angles. We do the grassroots, starting from the bottom up, and you have to consider, you're talking about the Paris Agreement and how they were urging Pope Francis to come out with this encyclical. And it's wonderful, but it's like, is there really, how much work is really getting done because we're not getting through to people.
Yeah.
You see all these corporations touting in their ads about, oh, we're going electric vehicles, all the motor companies by 2035, and we're doing this and that. And it's like, I think today I saw a headline saying, we went beyond a point of no return on some aspect of our degradation back in 2014.
Yeah.
And it's like, why are we not really sitting up and paying attention? Have we gotten that immune to the noise, of people calling out and saying, hey, we got to do something about this?
Yeah, I think your analysis is unfortunately spot on. This environmental degradation, it is a slow moving crisis. Because it's slow moving, you can stay stuck in denial or procrastination, or it's not that big.
Right.
It's one thing, if you get in an automobile accident, you have it's a crisis right there. You can't get around it. Or like World War II, we had to address it right there for our survival. This is as important as World War II in terms of long-term survival, but it's slow moving. And I think what we do have going for us, we do have a spokesperson in Pope Francis and those behind him. And so, when Pope Francis moves on, there's going to be someone like him to replace him, to be an oracle, to be a spokesperson. You need that. And the Holy Father is really recognized as a moral spokesperson for not just Catholics, but for the world, for everyone.
Yeah, I think we need to hear about.
Finish my thought. So that, coupled with the when with the crisis will get so bad that we have to do something. Those together, I think, then we'll move towards a solution. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think we need to hear about what Pope Francis. We need to hear from the Catholic point of view, from this holistic point of view. I think, like I said, it might be a crisis that we need to go through. But I think one thing we have to address is big business. How are we going to get through to them? And I guess we've got to start with each individual, and we've got to impress upon, how is it good for me? What's the benefit for me to give up my profit, give up my job, give up what's in it for me? And we got to show them that there's something in it for them, even right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, maybe short term, but then again, when we go back to the earlier part of the chapter, he says it needs to be a real paradigm shift of how we approach our world, because by asking that kind of question, that's still within the perspective of an egocentric, self-referential posture.
why should I do it?
Yeah,
Why?
that can only take you so
Why
far.
do I care?
Yeah. So unless there's a paradigm shift of going from an egocentric, individualistic, profit-driven posture to a relational one, then carrot and stick can only go so far. So there really has to be a change of assumptions and values for this to be sustained. And that's where this is what the church can bring, is to have us examine our anthropology. How do we value human life? Unless we get on the same page with that, then we're just going to fall back on the technocratic applications, and that's not going to work. So I think that's what spirituality, religion brings to the discussion, is to ask those questions. Who am I in relationship to God, other human beings, and nature? And the old way of thinking is not working. And we have something to offer that's a 2,000-year-old tradition, actually going back 4,000 years with our Jewish roots. So, and I think the fact that the Paris Agreement highly regards Pope Francis, they're willing to listen to his stance. They're not cutting out. They're not cutting and pasting, the religious stuff of his encyclical. They're reading the whole thing, and they know where he's coming from. And we are, to the very core, we are spiritual beings. We can't get around that. That's because we're made in the image of God. We are spiritual beings who are striving to be human, and we have something to contribute to that conversation. So yeah, you want to be as innocent as doves and savvy, what is it? Innocent as doves and wily as serpents. We have to be able to talk their language, but our situation is not going to be solved by egocentric, self-referential answers. It's not going to work. There has to be a shift from thinking relationally.
Mhm.
And
I'm sorry.
that's right.
I was just going to say, I know that towards the latter part of the paragraphs we were reading, and it talked about how, we have free will and we have freedom and all those good things. And I think we kind of forget about some of the other qualities that are attached to freedom, and we think we have freedom, but we forget that with this freedom comes a lot of responsibility. We teach our children that.
Yeah.
We tell them, okay, you're going to get freedom, but it comes with responsibility. But I think as adults, we kind of forget that. And we tend to tout the power of that freedom. I mean, look at our whole COVID situation with the masks.
Yeah.
It's our choice, our freedom to wear a mask, or
Yeah.
I'm not going to wear one.
regardless of the common good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another, something basic to examine, free will, freedom. Because in our society, that's self-referential, that freedom is seen as from external constraints.
Mhm.
I can do what I want to do when I want to do it, as long as it doesn't impede on other agents who are pursuing their own private interest. And so as people of faith, we say, no, that's not freedom. That's license. What freedom is to exercise my will in accordance with the Father's will. And it says, oh, that's you're being religious. Well, yeah, that's being spiritual, but we can show that the exercise of freedom detached from a relationship with God, that can't possibly end well. And so, yes, God does respect our freedom. And what's the appropriate use of our freedom is how it coincides with the Father's will and promotes the good of other human beings. And if it doesn't, then we shouldn't do it. And so that's a shift. But you say, well, I don't agree with that. Well, we can't really move further if you don't, because you're eventually going to fall back on self-reference, egocentrism.
Oh, excuse me. Is it come down to like a majority rules kind of thing? Because you're always going to there's going to be a group that is just going to be so entrenched and unmobile and just unwilling to give way. Is it just going to have to be?
Well, yeah, that's what evangelization is. Evangelization is planting the seeds of the gospel within the culture where it is. And this is part of evangelization. The Laudato Si is spiritually driven. And so there's always going to be those who need to embrace conversion or change of consciousness. And so it's not like Laudato Si is a really interesting encyclical that we can put on the, just occasionally refer to. If this is not implemented, we're screwed.
Yep.
There is no plan B. It's like the kids say, there is no planet B. And so you're talking about a fundamental shift of consciousness from a dominative consciousness of self-absorption, self-reference, of profit mode, consumerism. That is bankrupt. I mean, the effects are there. You can't argue that that's worked well. So
do you think
then they'd be open. Well, if that's not going to work, they have to be open to an alternative consciousness. And what's the alternative consciousness? It's the good news.
right? Do you think it'll start with fear and then eventually an embracement of the good news?
No, I think it's prophetic. If you look at the prophets, they denounced idolatry and social injustice. So we start. We start with denouncing the bankruptcy of the God substitutes, of consumerism, of extreme nationalism, of self-indulgence, autonomous individualism. We denounce those, and how they necessarily lead to social injustice. That if we're not in right relationship with God, if we have God substitutes, it inevitably leads to social injustice because we don't see human beings as they truly are. And so we denounce contemporary idols and social injustice. Then, once we've done that, then we say, here's the alternative. And it's not just plan B. If this alternative is not embraced, you are going to suffer inevitable consequences. It's not going to end well. It's either being in a right relationship with God and your brothers and sisters and creation, or you're going to go into the far country of the prodigal son. the far country, Cora Magra, the big emptiness. That's where you're going. So it's stark. Yeah, you don't so much start with fear. You really denounce the status quo, the dominant consciousness of our society, and you do it credibly and convincingly. Say, okay, you have to, you can't be doing the same thing, which is the definition of insanity. You have to be open to alternative vision. Do you want to listen? We have an alternative vision that's grounded in reality. It's grounded in truth and goodness and beauty. And here it is. Moreover, it's grounded in a person. The Word of became flesh, Jesus. So that's the shift. And so I think it's very encouraging that the world community really encouraged Francis to come out with this encyclical. That shows that they're willing to respect this religious figure. Because Francis is really, he's the pastor. He's not just the pastor of the Catholic Church. I think he's the pastor of the whole world. He's one person that people can listen to. And he's, he doesn't get churchy. He really is, he presents us in a way that people can understand. But he doesn't suppress his faith.
I can't find it right now, but he's very specific it really caught my attention at the very beginning. He says, I usually direct my encyclicals to Catholics and all people of goodwill. This particular encyclical is for everyone, each and every one of you.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he did that because he heard, he was urged to publish it before.
Well, this was in the making for a long time.
Okay.
But it was as to the sequence of it. And so what the Vatican did in conjunction with the Paris Agreement, they had like a timetable. We're going to get this out and we're going to promote it within the Catholic community. Then you can use it as a launching pad for the Paris agreements. But this is for the whole world. And it's, and he's built bridges with our Jewish brethren, our Muslim brethren, and this is and our Greek Orthodox, and so this is for the whole world community. It's not just for Catholics. And I think even though it's very Christocentric, I think someone who's non-Christian can read this and say, yeah, it's. I think people who would have a problem with it would be atheists, but even atheists are attracted to Francis. I mean, they like him because he's joyful, he's inclusive, he cares for people, and I think atheists would give him the time of day. I mean, he would get them. I mean, he has the charism. He could get atheists into the tent to listen. Yeah, he really is. And he is the Pope for our time. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we covered the chapter. Covered the chapter at your expense because it seemed like I was babbling on for a long time. So I hope that was fruitful and effective for you. That I don't want to just eliminate sections of this because there's really a fluidity here. There's a continuum, and I try to go with it, but I hope it was useful for you. So
it's great, and it's really helpful to be able to follow along in the book, right? I like that.
Yeah, and I found that it really, talking out loud with you, you go deeper. Because it's one thing to read it, but then to read it and to go back and reflect upon it, it really resonates. Okay, well, brothers and sisters, which we all are in relationship with our Lord Jesus, may our Lord continue to bless you and all your